For most people, training the primary movers in climbing is by far the best bang for buck. But as a physical therapist who works with climbers and as a climber myself, I tend to see a number of overlooked muscles that I think a lot of us can benefit from training, whether for preventing injuries or increasing climbing performance. So we're going to cover our top 10 most undertrained muscles for climbers and exercises I would recommend for each. Some of these will be quite niche, while others will have you thinking, why didn't I think of that? Number 10, lumbricals. These things are wild and they often don't get talked about, although anyone that's had a rough encounter with a two-finger pocket has probably experienced their wrath. Lumbricals are these weird, feather-looking muscles deep in our hands that connect to multiple tendons. When your fingers get pulled apart, it creates a shearing force on the lumbricals that can quickly lead to an injury. Lumbricals aren't the type of muscles that you're going to spend hours training every week for crazy huge gains, but a bit of exposure therapy goes a long way toward injury prevention. You can obviously train pockets on a hangboard, but this can be a bit daunting if you're inexperienced, so my preferred method is mobile board rows with 2 fingers. You can start with very light resistance and work your way up, and the slow repetition style allows you to stop if there's any discomfort. Number 9, anterior tibialis. The anterior tibialis, aka the bat hanger, aka the feet first toe hook the world machine, aka the primary ankle dorsiflexor muscle. Most of us would never think to train this guy, but if you struggle with toe hooks, it may be worthwhile. There is certainly some technique that goes into engaging a good toe hook, as well as components of hip mobility, but anterior tib strength will play an important role. You can train it by performing toe-anchored leanbacks like this, progressing difficulty with time under tension and/or how far you lean. For a spicier variation, you can perform bat hangs on a pull-up bar using a resistance band to modulate the weight, but perform at your own risk. Number 8, wrists. Your wrist obviously isn't a muscle, but the wrist flexors and extensors are crucial muscles for climbing. While having the swollest wrist muscles isn't going to make you send Al Thane, having adequate strength in all of them will prevent wrist discomfort when climbing on slopers, and training the wrist extensor specifically will help you avoid outer elbow pain or lateral epicondylitis. I've actually worked with many patients that develop a habit of crimping everything because it's a mechanically stronger position for the wrist, and when they climb on slopers, the wrists feel uncomfortable. To break this habit and cure your wrist woes, I recommend reverse curls for the extensors and small range wrist flexion for the flexors, which you can easily progress by increasing the weight over time. Number 7, flexor hallucis longus. Here's one you've probably never heard of. The flexor hallucis longus helps flex our big toe, which is crucial for pushing and pulling on footholds. Without this muscle, standing on small edges becomes impossible. Could training this muscle actually help us out on those microcrystals? Let's ask slab queen Anna Hazelnut.
So for all the slabs I do, I like to train my toes because sometimes your toes cramp when you're on a slab for a really long time. So what I'll do is I'll put like a towel or a sweatshirt down and I'll just do like toe curls. You just kind of try to gather as much of the fabric under your toes as possible.
If you want to take it up a notch, do full range heel raises all the way up onto the toes. Number 6, hamstrings. Just like the wrist extensors, climbers definitely don't need bulging hammies to climb hard, and for most climbers, hamstring exercises should not be a taxing part of your training routine. However, a bit of targeted hamstring strengthening will help you avoid an injury while heel hooking, which is one of the more common and debilitating climbing injuries. It will also allow you to be a more proficient climber, allowing you to use your heel more effectively to buy freedom for your hands. You'll save energy on overhung routes, be able to create more unique movements and beta to problem solve your project, and you'll keep better tension from your feet to your core. Band-resisted hamstring curls and RDLs are my top 2 recommendations here, as they will cover both straight leg and bent leg hamstring strength. Number 5, obliques. If I could train one group of core muscles, it would be these. They help create and control forward and backward motion, side to side, and rotation. These are truly multiplanar muscles that are constantly used in climbing. Compare that to the rectus abdominis, which I would probably call the most overtrained muscle in climbers, which just flexes our trunk forward or lifts our legs up. The rectus abdominis is still useful, of course, but not to the extent that most climbers think. It's not what primarily keeps your feet on the wall or what will magically unlock a front lever for you. The obliques, with their diagonal orientation, are much more functional, helping transfer forces from hand to foot. While there are loads of ways to train your obliques, if I had to recommend one, it may be the Copenhagen plank. It can be progressively overloaded by adding a hip dip and eventually adding weight. Though if you find this to be too challenging or if it creates discomfort on your knee, switch to a standard side plank dip. Number 4, lower trapezius. Climbing is an overhead sport that requires a ton of scapular retraction, and the lower trap is essential for making that happen. It's an extremely important muscle that doesn't often get the love it deserves. Strengthening it improves scapular and humeral mechanics, which helps prevent shoulder injuries. It's also helpful for preventing simple shoulder or neck pain that may develop due to overcompensation in the upper traps. Prone Ys, TRX Ys, or even band-resisted Ys will all hit the lower trap. They can be done with a single or double arm setup, but the most important aspect is awareness while performing this exercise. If you feel most of the work being done in the upper trap and are unable to keep the shoulder blade back and down, I would recommend lowering the weight or resistance until you can improve your form. Number 3, hips. I can't tell you how many climbers I've seen struggle to get high feet or engage a heel hook properly because they're limited in their hips. I know because I've been there, and it's something I'm still working on. There are actually several factors that go into good hip mobility. Having good hamstring strength allows you to feel comfortable pulling while in externally rotated hip positions like heel hooks. Having good awareness of glute activation allows you to get into those nice hip positions in the first place. Having flexible hip adductors ensures that they won't stop you from getting into that position. Having strong hip flexors will help you get your feet high up onto those holds, and having strong glutes and quads will help you press out of those deep squat positions. Obviously, there's a lot going on with our hips, so to get better hip mobility, it helps to identify which muscles are limiting you. In general, I recommend the frog stretch, deep single leg box squats with hand assistance is okay, and band-resisted hip flexion. High foot drills on the wall are also worthwhile. Number 2, shoulder external rotators. The external rotators of the shoulder, the infraspinatus and teres minor, are two of the most vital muscles in climbing when it comes to injury prevention and climbing performance. They stabilize the shoulder and help pull us in closer to the wall when we're in this commonly externally rotated position. These are two smaller muscles that are asked to do a lot of work in climbers, which is partly why they tend to be undertrained, as they will start off quite weak in the layperson. There's a reason the face pull is one of my favorite exercises, because of its simplicity and effectiveness in training the external rotators. For a face pull mega bonus cheat code, do it with an overhead press. That works the mid trap, external rotators, and low trap. Another great external rotator exercise is the scarecrow with 2 arms, or party rock with 1 arm. Number 1, the flexor digitorum profundus. Wait, what? The FDP is the primary finger flexor muscle. How could it be possibly undertrained in climbers? Flexing our fingers is basically all we do. Well, there are actually 2 common scenarios where I think the FDP is really an undertrained muscle. The first involves your average climber that doesn't do any targeted training for the FDP. You might think that with all the grabbing and holding and squeezing we do on the wall, our FDPs must be getting the best workout ever. And this is true until it's not. Without a systematic approach to training it, this climber may reach a point where their normal climbing routine stops putting enough load on the FDP to cause strength adaptations. Maybe they hit a plateau because their technique is limiting them, or maybe their climbing sessions are haphazard and unfocused, or maybe they're just afraid of pulling hard on their fingers. Whatever the reason, they're not progressively overloading their FDP, so it will cease to get stronger and their finger strength will plateau, and this will limit their climbing ability. Thus, their FDP is undertrained. The second scenario involves a climber who does targeted finger strength training, but they have a strong bias towards one particular grip style. In this example, no matter what type of hold our climber friend here encounters, they will almost always try to use a half crimp or full crimp position. They feel strongest in this position, so naturally they use and train it more. Of course, this eventually becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the reason they like this position is mostly because they've effectively trained it more than any other. The second our crimping friend encounters a hold that requires a more open hand position like a pocket or sloper, they're unable to generate anywhere close to the same level of force. They suddenly feel several grades weaker and give up quickly. Now, this isn't always an FDP issue. As we know from earlier, sometimes lumbrical sensitivity causes issues on pockets and wrist weakness causes discomfort in open hand positions. But barring those issues, lack of training to the FDP in open hand positions can become a huge limiter on certain climbs. Thus, again, the FDP is undertrained, just in a more specific way than the previous scenario. If you fall into either of those categories and want to do something about it, in my opinion, the hangboard is usually the way to go. Progressive overload is easy and it allows you to train all grip positions. I personally have been doing a lot of 3-finger drag training lately and have found I no longer need to crimp as many holds if I don't want to, which is quite useful. Make sure you watch our video on what you should know before starting to hangboard if you decide to start. Did anything on this list surprise you? What muscles do you believe are undertrained in climbers? Let us know your thoughts down in the comments as always. We also have full-length videos on several of the topics we talked about in this video. We'll link all of them near the top of the video description. Until next time, train, climb, send, and repeat.